First of all, thanks to Max and everybody who put this conference on. It's a pretty awesome thing to see. Goggin, who actually got me into Udemy back in the day as an advisor, he put together the Growth Hacking Conference a little while ago, and it was amazing to see how many people came out for such a really cool topic, and I think this is an equally cool topic. So hopefully I can share some insight from a different perspective today. So Entelo, unlike Box, is probably a company that you have not heard of. You guys okay still? You can hear me? Okay. Entelo, unlike Box, is probably a company that you have not heard of. So I want to just give 30 seconds on what we do. We provide software that helps many of the fastest growing companies in the world to find their next hires. So my guess is if I took another survey and I asked who out in the audience is running a startup and looking for a Ruby on Rails engineer or an iOS person or one of these folks, that a lot of you would raise your hands again because it's really hard to find these people. So what we've done at Entelo is we have crawled the web to help companies to better discover talent. At the end of the day, if you're an engineer, what's most relevant to you is your GitHub account, your Stack Overflow account. If you're a web designer, it's your Shots on Dribble or Behance or Carbonmade. And there are hundreds of these different sites out there. So we crawl the web, we pull all that data into an index. And then the second thing that we do, which I think people find interesting, it's really relevant actually to sales. I was having a good conversation with Doug from FlipTop last night about this, is we run predictive analytics to identify when talent's coming to market. Because at the end of the day, if you're looking for a Ruby person and you reach out to them and they're not looking for a new job, you're wasting your time, you're wasting their time. So what we do is we look at data that helps to identify when somebody might be coming to market so you can hire them more efficiently. And we work with some of the fastest growing companies in the world to do that. So my perspective today is not to stand up here as the guy who's hired 500 salespeople, because I haven't. I actually have 12 years of experience in consumer web, where depending upon what type of business you're running, you may not even have to hire salespeople. So I'm more the guy who's in the trenches right now, building the company. But the thing that I do have insight into, and where I can hopefully provide some value for all of you today, is we talk with hundreds of companies every single month about how they're building their company. What are the recruiting hacks? What are the tips? What are the tricks? And so I'll share some of that with you today. I've got a bunch of links for you, and you don't have to write them down because I've got a link at the end that just links to all the links. And so I'm going to share a bunch of stuff with you that hopefully is helpful. And I think this is helpful if you're running a startup, but I also think this is extremely relevant if you're inside an organization, because one of the highest leverage things you can do is to attract good people to your company. So if you're recruiting inside your company, the way you look like a rock star is you hire good people and then your team performs even better. And that's something that all the stuff that I'll share with you today hopefully will help you get started on that path. So we'll start off with this guy. Anyone know who this is? You can just shout it out. SAKA, right? So what does SAKA have to do with sales recruiting? The answer is nothing at all. So when I was going through and preparing a list of bullet points for this presentation, I realized that they actually all led to his last name, bizarrely enough. So when you think of this presentation, when you go home tonight and you're trying to remember what I said on stage, you can just think of SAKA, and it'll be the 5 letters that start the points out that I'm going to make today. So the first point that I wanted to talk about, and it gets into another guy who tends to put money into startup companies, is Mark Suster. And this is the importance of knowledge when it comes to recruiting. All of you are living at a really, really interesting time. It has never been easier to figure out how to build great teams than it is today. There are blogs, there are websites, there's Quora. There are all these resources where people are leaving hints. They're telling you, this is how I built my team. This is how I hired this person. This is the thing that worked. This is the thing that didn't work. And what I would encourage each of you to do as a starting point, if this is your first company, you have a few employees, you're kind of freaking because you've never done this before, is devour all of this stuff. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where you stop, because there's all sorts of other things that you have to do. You have to pick up mentor relationships, have a good team of investors, do all these other things. But it's really critical that you have a base amount of knowledge. I came into the enterprise software SaaS world 2 years ago from consumer web. I didn't know a damn thing. And I still don't know a lot. But I've learned a lot in the last 2 years, and there's a lot of resources that I've used to get me up to speed quickly. And a lot of them, frankly, are resources that didn't exist 2 years ago. So it's been fun to watch all this play out in real time. So Suster's blog is awesome. One of the biggest things I've taken away from reading Mark's stuff is the importance of hiring the right salespeople for your company. If you're an early stage company, if you're growing right now, you probably don't want to hire that super senior, super polished person who's been on the inside of Oracle or Salesforce for many years. Because guess what? That dude or that gal had the brand of Oracle to sell. They had the brand of Salesforce to sell. You don't have a brand. Entelo right now, we don't have a brand yet, right? We're still growing. We're still early stage. So what you need to do is you need to find somebody who's the right fit, who's going to be able to allow you to scale your company without having all this power, all of this branding behind you. And that's something that I read very early on in Suster's blog, and it has impacted how we've thought about building the team at Entelo. I've got a couple bonuses on the S letter today. It just so happens that my three favorite things to read in the SaaS world, I'll start with the letter S. So we already talked about Suster. I got to give props to Jason Lemkin and SaaStr. I've learned a lot from Jason's blog over the years. If you're not reading that, immediately drop everything and do that. And the third person is David Skok at Matrix. How many people have read David Skok's blog? Great, awesome. So if you're not reading David Skok's blog and you're a SaaS entrepreneur, another thing, cancel your meetings tomorrow, dive deep. It's a really deep source of information when it comes to SaaS. And again, I've got all these in a bit.ly bundle at the end, so you don't have to worry about writing all this stuff down. The second thing with recruiting, this gets into the A, is the importance of vision. So when you go out and you're trying to hire your team, what you're selling them on, especially if you're an early stage entrepreneur, is you're selling them on the fact that you have a stronger vision, a bigger vision than the next guy. Because anybody can go work for another startup. There's a million companies out there that are hiring right now. So why should they come work for you? Why should they come work for your 5-person company? And that's because you can paint a picture that the world's going to be different based on what you're doing. And so this leads me to what I think is the single best recruiting line of all time. And many of you already know this. But it's the classic line from Steve Jobs, which is, he's trying to recruit Scully back in the day. He says, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to change the world? So when you go out and you try to recruit people, when you try to recruit those salespeople, those engineers, what your mission is to try to figure out what your variation of this is. Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to change the world? I actually pulled this from Quora. If you haven't been on this thread in Quora, there's a thread which is, what are the single greatest recruiting lines of all time? And there's hundreds of them, and they're awesome. But this is my favorite. So for A, we've got Apple, and does anyone know who this is? Angela Ahrens, CEO of Box. That would be Aaron Levy. CEO of Burberry, who just joined Apple to help them set their store strategy. So Apple, even at the ginormous market cap that Apple has, is still out recruiting top talent. It's such an important part of what they do. It's such an important part of why they are where they are. Now on to the letter C. So I married a girl from Kentucky. And when you marry a girl from Kentucky, there's something that I think they actually put in the wedding contract, which is that you will become a fan of the Kentucky Wildcats. And you will have to root for UK for the rest of your life, regardless of who they're playing against, even if you grew up in Minnesota and you're a big Gophers fan. So I am a UK fan. It's been a fun run these last 3 or 4 years, with a national championship and some great teams. But the reason why I mention this is because there's a guy that I think is the best recruiter, certainly in college basketball, maybe in all of sports, maybe in the world. I mean, I look at this picture, and I want to go work for this guy. All right, I don't know, how about you guys? I don't know how much you follow sports, but Calipari every single year builds an incredible team. He gets 5 All-Americans to start for him, and then every year they all go pro, and he builds 5 more All-Americans. And he's won a national championship. He's been to a ton of Final Fours. And there's been some articles about why Calipari is such a great recruiter. And what his players say is the same thing. They say, Coach Cal, he does one thing that sets him apart. He always looks out for what's best for his players. So when that freshman has an awesome year, first team All-American, wins a national championship, Coach Cal has an interest in getting that person to stay at UK. But he doesn't do that. He sits down with that player, and if he feels it's sincerely in their best interests to go pro, he tells that person, you go pro. And what happens is that reverberates around all of the other really good players. And he builds up such a reputation that every year the best people want to go work for him because they know that he'll shoot straight with them, that he'll do what's in their best interest. So my approach to recruiting, and I know a lot of the great CEOs that I know have a similar approach, is to say when you hire somebody or you're recruiting somebody, you want what's best for them. What's best for them might be joining your company, but it might not be. If they join your company, there are things that you can do to really help them get to the next level. No one's going to work for you forever, and so if you can do those things, you're going to be a league above. And I think the example of Coach Cal is a phenomenal example. Next C, again, another guy who puts a lot of money into startups, maybe more than anybody, Ron Conway, kind of a national treasure, certainly a Silicon Valley treasure. And Ron was the keynote at a conference called War for Talent about a year ago. It was a phenomenal conference. I'm sure some of you were in attendance that day. And Ron relayed a story in his presentation that I think was really cool. And it was a story about Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg was speaking at YC, at startup school. And one thing Zuckerberg said, one of the quotes, which I think is apropos for any of you who are out there building teams, any of you out there who are recruiting, is if you're not completely exhausted from recruiting, you're not doing your job. And so recruiting, even if you've got a tool like Entelo that helps, even if you've got some great people on your team, is really hard work. You got to get in front of people. You got to show up every single day if you want to build a great team. And he also relayed that on the eve of the IPO, Zuckerberg did something like 6 hours worth of interviews with people he was trying to recruit for Facebook. This company's about to go public, multi-billion-dollar market cap, biggest day of his life the next day, and he's out there trying to recruit people for Facebook. So it never stops. If you're the CEO, if you're the founder of your company, you're going to always be out recruiting, always, 100%, not 100% of the time, but you're never going to stop recruiting. I spend right now probably about 50% of my time on recruiting in our company, and I anticipate that's going to be the case for a long time. And if someone is trying to compete with us and they're spending 10%, 15%, 20% of their time recruiting as CEO, we're going to beat them because we're putting more effort into the process. So it's really hard work, but it pays off incredible, incredible dividends. And that brings me to the final A, which of course, no good presentation is complete without a picture of Mr. T. So the A team, which is the single highest leverage activity that you can do, whether you're running a startup, building a sales team, doing anything in the business world, is recruiting. Because there's nothing that you can do that's a better use of your time than getting good people to work around you. So I would encourage all of you to really think hard. I know this is a sales conference, not a recruiting conference, but I would really think hard about what it means to build a great team. I would become a student of recruiting. I would learn from people that have been there and done that before. I think it's something that so few people put emphasis on. There's always a success around what does a product look like and marketing, all these things, and those are really important. But at the end of the day, the hard work that really pays off gets into the team. So just to review today, SAKA is our theme. And so we had Suster, we had Angela Ahrens from Apple, we had Coach Cal, we had Ron Conway, and we had the A-Team. And that's kind of your mnemonic device to remember today. 3 links for you before I turn it over to questions. First off, I wouldn't be doing my job as CEO if I didn't tell you that we're hiring. So Entelo.com/careers if you're sales, marketing, customer success, engineering, we want to talk to you. Second, I put all of the links for a lot of the things I talked about today up on Bitly. So Bitly/saleshacker is about 15 links up there with different things that I mentioned. 2 things I did not mention. One thing that we have on Entelo is something called Recruiter Academy, which is a place where you can go and you can learn more about recruiting. That's up there. And then I also wrote a 3,000-word blog post when we kicked off Entelo called Startup Recruiting 101. And so I would encourage you to check that out. And finally, I do end up tweeting a lot about sales and recruiting, so you can follow me. So that's it. And I just want to, again, thank Max and everybody who put this together and open it up for any questions that any of you might have.
Thanks a lot. I spend a lot of time recruiting, and so I'm interested in terms of how you define the total addressable market. How big is it? Mm-hmm. How do you kind of attack it specifically? Is LinkedIn a channel, or how do you see leveraging that for your growth strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the thing that we feel right now with recruiting and kind of with what's going on is we started our company because the amount of professional data about people is exploding, and the GitHubs and the Stack Overflows and all these things that didn't exist 5 years ago are now super relevant. And so it was our feeling that over time, companies are going to need to tap into that data to really recruit effectively. And if you look at what's out there and you look at the job boards, you look at LinkedIn, their market cap, you look at this stuff, I mean, it's tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars that are at stake right now. So what we think from our perspective is that the explosion in professional data, some of which relies on LinkedIn, but an increasing amount that actually doesn't rely on LinkedIn, or doesn't live on LinkedIn is really why we're building our business. I think a great idea, and I'm excited for someone to build it, maybe someone in this room will do it, is to build the equivalent of like a GitHub for salespeople. Because there's no community right now that salespeople, all right, I like it. Are you going to build it? Awesome, man, thank you. Thank you. I mean, you think of what GitHub meant for the engineering world, right? And there's not that same community for salespeople. So I think it's someone will do it. They'll knock it out of the park. And then what Entelo will do is help companies find people who might be in that site or any of these other sites.
Yeah. Tiny social from Tata that TK was talking about might be that community.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Thank you. I appreciate the question.
All right. Let's hear your craziest recruiting story. What's the craziest thing you've ever done to hire somebody?
Gosh.
At least entertain them.
I'm gonna actually share one from one of our customers. I can't say which one, but this guy is probably my favorite recruiter, and he's CEO, but he's an amazing recruiter. I've learned a lot from over the years. And what he does is he focuses on the spouse of the person he's trying to recruit. And so he tries to figure out, like, does she like flowers? Does he like golf? Does whatever, right? And because at the end of the day, what are we all going to do? If we have a significant other, if we have a spouse, we're going to go home and we're going to be like, should I do this? Should I not? Should I do this? Should I not? And if flowers show up or something else shows up, it's like it might tip the balance a little bit. So that's the craziest thing I've heard.
Coming from a married guy, super smart.
Exactly.
Super smart.
Exactly. Awesome, man. Thanks for the question.
Any tips on recruiting when you aren't engineering, or I guess when the founders aren't engineers, when it's more of a sales founder role?
So repeat it one more time, just so I'm clear.
Any tips on building a company that engineers want to work at when you aren't engineers?
Technical? Yeah. So there's a few things that I would offer. I think I actually may have answered a core question along these lines. So number one, get as technical as you can. You're not going to write production code for your company, but just the fact that you might be learning some basic Rails or JavaScript will actually be meaningful to the people that you're recruiting. They'll appreciate that. So that's number one. And you could do General Assembly, or you can do stuff online or Udemy or whatever to do that. So that's number one. Number two is get smart technical people around your company. And that can be advisors. It can be mentors that you have. It can be people, because you're going to ultimately need to vet those folks. And so it's not just about selling them on why they should join you, but it's also making sure that you've got people that can evaluate. Because if you're not technical, how are you going to evaluate another engineer, right? And then I think the third thing is it's kind of a dual answer, which is to be working on interesting problems. Because at the end of the day, engineers want to work on interesting stuff, and then leverage the strengths of being a startup. So you can't compete with Facebook, you can't compete with Twitter, you can't compete with these guys on salary or benefits or anything like that. But there are things that you compete with, right? Which is that you don't have as much bureaucracy. People are going to have more autonomy. There's going to be a steeper professional growth curve. I think it was Raboy or somebody wrote a really good piece about how you go work in a big company and you're going to be very narrow as an engineer, but you work in a startup and you're going to be all over the place and you're going to grow faster. So you got to sell to your strengths versus being like, oh, we can give you this much cash. Because guess what? Bigger companies are going to really kill you on that front. So those are a few tips. Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm just curious, who do you find are your best targets within organizations? Are you talking to HR departments or hiring managers? Or
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, so we definitely see that the users of our product are recruiters and also sourcers. And for those of you who might not have a lot of experience in the sourcing world, that might not even be a term you're familiar with. But it's people that are at the front lines really trying to fill the front of the funnel. So just like in sales where you've got your SDRs and people are trying to get leads in the door, there's also the equivalent of that in the recruiting world. Now those are our users, but those aren't the economic buyers. So the economic buyers for us is like the head of talent acquisition, the head of HR, people at a more senior level. So we've got a sales cycle where we've got the user and we've got the economic buyer, and we kind of have to make both parties happy. Thanks. Cool. You're welcome.
Looking for any tips you have on how to choose between candidates. Let's just say you got 3, check off all the boxes. You only got one bullet for budgeting resource reasons. How do you choose between?
There's so much that goes into the answer to that question. It's a great question. So I'll tell you one of the things that we've done, which I think a lot of you guys can take advantage. My guess is a lot of you are probably running companies that are sub 10 employees. One of the things that we've done with Entelo, and it's starting to change as we grow and we get bigger, but we actually have the mentality that for a lot of people, you can hire them, you can bring them on board to do work for you before you hire them. And so what we do is we bring on board people to contract for us. Not everybody, but a lot of our people have done this. And what we say is a couple things. Number one, this is as much about you as it is about me. If you're going to join my company, guess what? You're taking a risk. You're taking a chance. It might be the next 4 or 5 years of your life. You better make sure that you know what you're getting in for. But at the same time, I want to evaluate you. Number two is we're not trying to get you to work for us for free or even a reduced rate. So we literally tell people, what do you want to get paid when you contract for us? And unless they give us some insanely outlandish number, we give them that. Because at the end of the day, we want them to feel like even if at the end of 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, it wasn't a fit, that they haven't wasted their time in coming to work for us. And one thing I will say about our company, we're not that big yet. We're kind of low double-digit employees right now, but we actually haven't lost anybody yet. We haven't had to fire anybody. We haven't had to let anyone go. And that won't be the case forever, but I think it's because we've been really thoughtful. We've tried to work with people a little bit in advance of actually making the hire. So I'd offer that as a hack that I think you can do when you're 10 to 15 employees that you certainly can't do when you're 50.
This is a pretty specific question.
Sure.
For the Rails community, what trends have you seen for senior developers?
In terms of what kind of trends?
In terms of the data that you track, do you see any trends in terms of either engagement with sort of certain networks or, like you said, you're seeing predictive trends? That's maybe you could share something.
Yeah, everyone's on GitHub, right? So, it's really tough to find. There are some Rails engineers that don't have GitHub profiles right now, but everyone's on GitHub. Everyone's more visible than they've ever been because of that, right? So you can go to GitHub, and Entelo is a more powerful way to search places like GitHub and Stack, but you can run a search on GitHub. There's just ways to do that. I think that the trend that we're seeing, which is kind of interesting, is a lot of new kind of people coming through the dev boot camps and things like that, trying to get their first job. And I think it's tough, if you're a startup, we get a lot of applications from people, just graduated dev boot camp. Tough to take a chance on that person because, we need people that are a little more senior and that are a little more seasoned in our organization. But I think it's a great opportunity if you're in a larger organization to bring some folks on if they're hungry. Rails is such a great framework where you can get up to speed really quickly versus some of the languages people would use back in the day.
Yeah, just going back to the comment you made earlier about GitHub for salespeople. So that must have come out of some problem that you had using the other data sources available, I'm guessing, like LinkedIn or whatever wasn't cutting it. Is there, what are the challenges that you have found in hiring salespeople with the tools available? What are some of the things that you do to gather data about, salespeople that might be available?
Yeah, well, one of the things, and I actually learned this, our director of sales, Doug Hall, is here. Doug, if you want to throw your hand up. I've learned this kind of from Doug, is that what we really want when we're looking at a resume is some really tangible, very concrete data about that person, right? And everyone's going to say, oh, I'm this great closer, and I do this, and I do that. And you get them on the phone, and they're really personal because if they weren't, they wouldn't be in sales. But it's really fun for us to look at someone's background and say, did you hit quota? Did you exceed quota? Did you make President's Club? Like, what are the binary things that tell us that you're actually really good? I think when someone does end up building GitHub for sales, it'll be things like, I don't know how this will fly, but it'll be things like upload your W-2, right? And so we can see how much money you made last year. Now, that maybe won't be broadcast to the world, but maybe there'll be some way for someone on the back end to independently verify that this person actually made the kind of money that they said they'd make. So I think there's some things specific to salespeople that GitHub for Sales would actually have that would be very different from LinkedIn, very different from other places where salespeople are hanging out. And I'm psyched for that because I think at the end of the day, like, you can go to GitHub and you can see someone's profile and you can look at their code and you can be like, yeah, this guy knows his stuff. But sales is tougher to do that for. And I think a good community in that space will make it easier for salespeople to really kind of stand up and say, this is what I'm good at, this is what I can do.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you, guys. All right, it looks like that's all the questions. Thank you guys so much. This was fun.